This is where Anne Boleyn set out to be crowned queen, and also where she lost her head.
Fire!
The Tower of London has been greeting VIPs with gun salutes for hundreds of years. Today, 4 guns are fired. But when Anne Boleyn came down the Thames to the Tower Palace on the eve of her coronation, more than 1,000 cannon boomed down the river. Her new husband, Henry VIII, made sure she had every possible comfort as she lodged in the Tower's royal apartments during the coronation celebrations.
Was he married?
Anne's coronation was one of the last great moments for the palace at the Tower. The Tower's curators have decided to commission a model to bring it to life. They have a collection of detailed Tudor plans of the Tower. Computer modeler Thomas Lyle is going to turn them into 3D virtual reality.
What this shows us is what the Tower of London was like at the end of the 16th century, and it is far away the best source that we have for the appearance of the buildings that Anne Boleyn would have used when she stayed here in 1533 at the time of her coronation. The Tudors were mad for pageantry and for sort of visual expression of power and occasion, and so although we don't have specific information or sources for this, it's a fair bet that the whole place would have been looking magnificent. And the other point, which is very important, is that on this particular occasion, as on all coronations, the reason that you come to the Tower is not because it's comfortable to stay in, because it isn't, not because it's handy, because it isn't, but because everyone had always done this, because it's an ancient historic building, because it was connected to the coronation of every previous sovereign of England. So it's a self-conscious act of repetition of what a king's predecessors had done.
The king lavished affection on Anne, but she needed more than his love to make the public believe she was the true queen. Henry decided to exploit all the ceremonial associations of the Tower to boost Anne's popular standing. She was to be paraded before the people along the time-honoured coronation route from the Tower to Westminster Abbey. This was how all monarchs were displayed at coronation time, and Anne wasn't going to be any different. The problem was that the Tower's palace buildings were dilapidated. Henry rarely stayed at the Tower and saw it primarily as a fortress. But soon after he married Anne, the palace saw a sudden flurry of activity as her coronation approached.
And these 2 slim volumes here show us what was done at the Tower, and there are pages and pages and pages of entries in them, organised under the craftsmen responsible. So here we have carpenters, bricklayers, plasterers and so on. These volumes show us that the carpenters and the plasterers and the bricklayers at the Tower were concentrating on the crucial repairs necessary to the royal apartments, to the king's apartments, to putting up new buildings for the Queen, that were required to make the building ready to receive the court and the royal party for the first time in decades.
This is where Anne's palace buildings stood. But on the surface, virtually nothing remains. To recreate the vanished palace, Thomas is getting help from the Tower's curators. All they have to go on are a few documents and a scattering of rocky remains.
All of the business of the later medieval palace, that's all down in that area there, and round a sort of courtyard. Right. And again, I mean, as you see, if you look down there, there's nothing there. It's all gone. We are at the bottom end of the majestic Great Hall of the palace, and isn't it wonderful? As you see, it's sort of all completely gone. But the round tower behind us is a bit of the medieval palace. That's the back of the Wakefield Tower. And I hope that's where the kitchens of the palace were. The documents say kitchens that end. So you're sort of walking into them now.
Kitchen here.
Yeah.
Then you've got all the bits between the kitchen.
Yeah.
Wall here.
Buttery and a pantry there for bread and wine, all those sort of things.
But up there.
Yeah, I think, well, that's right. I think in terms of ground levels, we've lost a bit too.
It's a very big building. It's not It's by any means the biggest hall in England at the time, but it's a very big building, 60 foot wide. 60 foot's the length of most grand halls.
So it's 60 foot from the flower bed, nearly as far as the trees.
The Great Hall was the centrepiece of the palace complex at the Tower. This was where Anne and Henry feasted before her coronation. Thomas can get a good idea of what the Tower's lost hall might have looked like. At Winchester, a similar Great Hall survives in wonderful condition. Winchester Great Hall was built at the same time as the now vanished hall in the Tower Palace, for the same purposes, by order of the same man, King Henry III, and with the same epic feel.
This is the business end. Up here is the most important bit, and this is where the king would sit on a painted chair. There's documents about that, with the Queen if she was present, and with the highest dignitaries, and they sat in a raised position so that everyone can see them and they can see everyone. Well, this is just the sort of detail I'd really love to be able to tell you we had at the Tower, but I actually don't know. But, you know, if you just sort of squat down here and have a look at the base,
Oh, it's very beautifully done.
it's so lovely, isn't it?
The festivities held at the Great Hall on the eve of Anne's coronation represent the high point of her career. At 32 years of age, she was the wife of one of the greatest kings in Europe, pregnant with the future Queen Elizabeth I, and surrounded by luxury and indulgence. Thomas is grappling with the external appearances of the Tower Palace at the time of Anne Boleyn's coronation. The palace buildings Anne stayed in 1533 have now all disappeared. This will be the first time the palace that once stood in this grassy corner has been resurrected in more than 200 years. The Cold Harbour Gate stood at the entrance to the palace enclosure. The Great Hall, repaired and redecorated for Anne. And the Queen's Great Chamber, with windows overlooking the palace gardens. Henry VIII's jewel house, full of heavy treasure chests and precious metals. To the east, the Great Garden, sitting in its own courtyard with low wooden railings and posts carrying statues of heraldic beasts. The King's Gallery, for promenading and viewing the gardens. In the centre stood William the Conqueror's Great White Tower, which Henry topped with pepper pot domes and golden weather vanes. The Tower curators are checking the model for accuracy.
I think it's absolutely fantastic. Yeah, I mean, it is really good. It's terribly exciting.
It's just so brilliant because you kind of imagine these buildings in your mind in a sort of vague way. And actually, in a sense, it is the process of making all those little tiny snippets of information into a sort of 3D image or an image of any sort that then allows you to realise actually that can't mean what I thought it meant because it doesn't work in that space.
I think it's amazing because it is the backdrop for some of the great dramas of the Tower's history that we bang on about endlessly.
That's a fantastic achievement. To see it there, brilliant.